Happening now, the George Zimmerman jury gets to work and makes a request. We'll go back over a key instruction the judge gave the members of the jury. Also, an interview you're seeing first right here on CNN. Zimmerman attorney Mark O'Mara tells us what he thinks of Trayvon Martin's parents. Plus, you're going to hear what Trayvon Martin's father is hoping for the most from the jury. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room. There are very specific guidelines under Florida law for jurors to follow as they decide whether George Zimmerman is guilty of second-degree murder or guilty of manslaughter, or if he's not guilty at all. Judge Deborah Nelson spelled all of that out in her instructions to the jurors before they began their deliberations about 3 hours ago. Listen to her discuss the parameters for self-defense under the state's Stand Your Ground law.
If George Zimmerman was not engaged in an unlawful activity and was attacked in any place where he had a right to be, he had no duty to retreat and had the right to stand his ground and meet force with force, including deadly force, if he reasonably believed that it was necessary to do so to prevent death or great bodily harm to himself or another, or to prevent the commission of a forcible felony.
We're back with our panel right now. Jeffrey is joining us, Mark and Sonny as well. All right, those are specific instructions, and it's a pretty high hurdle. Sonny, let me start with you. For the jurors to overcome, if they are going to convict, if they're going to find Zimmerman guilty, here's a couple of questions that that cries out to be answered. If George Zimmerman was not engaged in an unlawful activity, was George Zimmerman at the time of the encounter engaged in an unlawful activity?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the question before the jury. You heard the defense argue, well, it's not unlawful to follow someone. It's not unlawful to call the police on someone. It's not unlawful to think someone is a criminal. And I think that was a strong argument for the defense. They were, of course, arguing that in light of the jury instruction. But I thought that the prosecution countered that extremely well by saying, yeah, well, he did cross the line because he was told not to follow. He followed, he pursued, he confronted. Now, of course, the jury has to believe that. They have to believe that taking everything together made his actions unlawful. He went just a step too far.
But let me interrupt, Sonny. Even if the 911 operator said don't follow, would it be illegal if he then still followed? In other words, would it be an unlawful activity to disobey what the 911 operator said?
I think it would depend on what his state of mind is, what the jury believes his state of mind is. If the jury believes, Wolf, that he got out of his car with the intent that Trayvon Martin, one of these effing punks, would not get away, yeah, that's very different from just following and observing and not confronting. That's a different set of circumstances.
The other stipulation that Judge Nelson, and I'll bring Mark into this, was was he in a place when all this happened where he had a right to be? And the answer?
No, the first one, the answer was no, he was not breaking the law. And the second answer is yes, he was illegally allowed to be there. Sonny's argument goes into the depraved mind, the evil intent, and all that, which gets weaved into the state's theory of prosecution. But standing alone, neither of those are illegal. And that's a huge hurdle for the state to overcome. The jurors, I've got with me the jury instructions, 27 pages. Whether they're going to read them or not, we don't know. But under Florida law, they have these in the deliberation room with them. So if they're going to stick to what the judges instructed, that's one reason I've been saying that I think it's a hard hurdle for them to overcome to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. If emotions take over and they are not dealing with this specifically, then that's where maybe a manslaughter conviction comes. But to answer your questions, he was legally doing what he was allowed to do.
He was not, according to you, he was not engaged in an unlawful activity. He was attacked in a place where he had a right to be. That's the argument that the defense made. And Jeffrey, let me bring you into this. If he believed all of that, did he have the right self if endangered with great bodily harm?
Well, he had a right to self-defense, but can I just talk about the emperor's new clothes here for a second? Those instructions are nearly incomprehensible. Jury instructions in general are nearly incomprehensible. I mean, it's not the judge's fault that she's required to give them, but I just am filled with sympathy for these jurors who have to listen. I mean, that one sentence that she read, that must have had 3 or 4 negatives in it. I mean, it's just very hard to understand the legal gobbledygook
All right, hold on for
that we
one
expect
second,
jurors to understand.
Well, a minute later, actually less than a minute later, she followed up with this instruction to the jury. I'll play the clip.
In your consideration of the issue of self-defense, you have a reasonable doubt on the question of whether George Zimmerman was justified in the use of deadly force. You should find George Zimmerman not guilty. If, however, from the evidence you are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that George Zimmerman was not justified in the use of deadly force, you should find him guilty if all the elements of the charge have been proved.
Jeffrey, that's another one. If there's a little bit of doubt, if they're a little wishy-washy, they have to find him not guilty.
Yeah, that seems to be the gist of it. I mean, it's not a little bit of doubt, it's a reasonable doubt. Prosecutors are always emphasizing the word reasonable. You know, it's not that the jury has to, the prosecution has to prove beyond any doubt in the world. Is it beyond a reasonable doubt? The defense is always talking about the word doubt. The prosecution talks about the word reasonable. But again, you notice that when the judge was reading that, she left out the word if the first time. I mean, it's very hard to understand these instructions, and it's a good thing that they have a copy in the jury room, because this is tough stuff.
Well, I'm sure they'll be reading and rereading and rereading again those jury instructions. They all have a copy of those 27 or so pages. All right, stand by. There's much more to discuss, including George Zimmerman's attorney in an interview you will hear and see first right here on CNN. He tells us when he thinks race was injected into the case, plus hundreds of new charges